Welcome to another edition of Around the Table, Politics 2021. I'm Stacy Smith. 6 months go by in a hurry, and we are now looking at another election already. And if they aren't running now, some people are looking ahead and hard at running next year. It's also the time when the losing party from the last election takes a look back to try to figure out what went right and what went wrong. And also, voters begin to take a look back at what they did. So let us begin our discussion now with our great panelists, and we start with former Pennsylvania Governor Tom Corbett. Mr. Corbett was not only the governor of Pennsylvania, he was also elected state attorney general and was the U.S. attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania. Tom is now with a law firm and teaches law at Duquesne University. On the other side of the table, we find Jim Byrne. Jim is the former chairman of the State Democratic Party in Pennsylvania. Also, he served as Allegheny County Council president and also a long time as mayor of Millvale. Jim practices law now in the city of Pittsburgh. We go back around the table, we find Keith Schmidt. Keith is well known across the state as the state director for former Republican Senator Rick Santorum. Keith also worked as an advisor to Santorum's 2012 presidential campaign. And Keith, who first became active in politics in the Reagan years, has had his own consulting firm now for more than a decade. Finally, we turn to the great philosopher of Around the Table, Joe Mistic. Joe is well versed in Democratic politics around the state, and especially here in the city of Pittsburgh, where he served as deputy mayor and held several other positions within the city. Joe teaches law at Duquesne University, and you can read his thoughts on politics and life every week in the Trib. Welcome to all of you back to another edition of Around the Table, Politics 2021. As I mentioned, in May, which we are in right now, we have the election coming up for the primary for most people, but in the city of Pittsburgh, it's also a primary for the mayor's office. The incumbent is Bill Peduto, but he has had several opponents already filed against him. As always, whoever wins the Democratic primary for mayor also usually just is a walk-in for the mayor of Pittsburgh. Republicans rarely ever have a candidate that can compete with the Democrat for the city's highest office. So I'm going to begin with the Democratic side of the table. Jim Byrne, your thoughts about the mayor's race right now, because Peduto does have some challengers.
He does have challengers, and the challenger to watch is State Representative Ed Gainey. He has familiarity with the city of Pittsburgh, obviously. When I was county chairman, I appointed him chairman of the City of Pittsburgh Democratic Committee, which gave him more access to the 32 city wards. He knows the inside and out of the party politics and the issues with the city of Pittsburgh. Mayor Peduto has been stumbling through this primary. There have been increases in gun violence, increases in violence. The perception from many that his response to this has been woefully inadequate. Mr. Gainey is not out of this race. What may hurt Mr. Gainey is the fact that there are two other competitors in the primary. There's only so many opposition votes to go around. And all of us here know that when you have an incumbent, there's only a certain amount of people that are not going to be for that person. You get more than one challenger into a primary, you're going to dilute that opposition, which enhances the chances of the incumbent to win. However, having said that, Mayor Peduto could still come out. He should probably win. But if he comes out of this 50%, under 50%, below 55, that speaks volumes to the lack of support he has in the electorate. And it could entice a challenger to come after him as an independent Democrat in the fall. An independent saying that they're affiliated with the Democratic Party or that they just want good government could give Bill a run for his money if he comes out of this looking damaged and looking vulnerable.
All right, Joe Mistic, you, if anyone, is very well versed in city politics, especially running for the mayor of the city of Pittsburgh with Sophie Masloff. Your thoughts?
Well, it would be historic if Peduto were to lose. An incumbent Democrat has not lost since the 1930s. It would be it would be a big thing if he were to lose this race. However, that being said, his campaign seems to think that they're in some jeopardy here. I don't know how else you explain the savagery and the unfairness of the attacks on Ed Gainey. You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't take that kind of gambit unless you thought that it was necessary in order to beat back a challenge. So they may be reading polls that we're not reading, and they may be perhaps worried about an historic upset. But it looks like they think they're in a race, and that's not necessarily bad for Pittsburgh. That's probably good for Pittsburgh.
Would you agree with Jim about if he doesn't come in at 55% or higher?
Yeah, I think strange things can happen and have happened in Pittsburgh mayor's races. Mayor Caligiuri ran after forming his own party and won the seat. His first time out for an election in his own right after he'd acceded to the position when Pete Flaherty went to Washington, D.C. So, something like that could happen. But, I think that they're worried about the East End. If you look at the nature of their campaign ads, they seem to think that this battle is going to be won or lost here. I don't think Bill Peduto has been real popular outside of the East End, but this has been his stronghold. And this is where I think that they may be seeing Ed Gainey gaining a foothold, making some progress, and perhaps posing a threat.
If I may, Stacy, very quickly on that. For your viewers, the East End, I'm sure they know this, but that's Bill Peduto's backyard. Right. That's where he was spawned politically. The 14th Ward, the 7th, all the progressive wing that he championed to get elected. And if he's struggling there, and I think the professor is exactly right, that would be analogous if I ran for a statewide or a county office and got crushed in Millville. That's a bad sign that the people that got me into office to begin with are no longer for me. It speaks to a deeper vulnerability in November, possibly.
Okay, great. Keith, your thoughts?
Well, I don't think if we did a job performance poll on the sitting mayor that he'd score particularly well. I think he'd fare differently earlier in his 2 terms, but right now there's a sense he would be vulnerable based on the fact that there isn't a lot of excitement about Bill Peduto, and there's some challenges to some of his recent decisions. All that being said, Bill Peduto will win the Democratic nomination on May 18th, in my opinion, largely because of the way election law runs in this region. One thing, he was able to change the funding sources for mayors, so they put a lot more limits on what you're allowed to give to a mayor, so it makes it more difficult for a challenger to put it to get large donations to wage a contest against a sitting incumbent. But the most important thing is there's a lot of cities that go by runoffs if you don't get the 50%. And the fact is the fact that the mayor has opponents instead of an opponent really favors him. All that he has to win is a plurality. He does not have to win a majority to win the nomination. So that almost assures him at least a nomination for the next term. 2 other things. I agree with both my Democratic colleagues on this call that he is still vulnerable if that number is at or near 50% or below 50%. And I'm not in a position to name the person, but I am well aware of a well-funded, articulate, independent that is planning a race in the fall against the mayor. And he could be very vulnerable if that comes to bear. And he did not perform particularly well in the primary. 2 more things. I'm sorry. The East End issues. I noticed when I was doing some research for this conversation today that Deb Gross has endorsed Ed Gainey. That's an interesting endorsement. She carries some weight in that part of the city. And then looking back to the fall, my final comment would be, he's not vulnerable, even if we got somebody on the ballot. Listen, you can't run Republicans for mayor when you have no base. The Republicans, my fellow Republicans, have not done a good enough job of registering people in the city. And until we do that, we can't count on running a candidate and having any success. But this mayor is vulnerable against a strong independent, strong, well-funded independent this fall based on the situation and dynamics of his candidacy as it exists right now.
So what you're saying, Keith, if I read you correctly, is an independent in this particular race, if they are well-funded, would draw those who are opposed to Peduto and also Republicans that live in the city.
That would be the coalition. I think you would do like-minded Republicans and then whatever base of support or of opposition, as Jim Byrne said, there is a certain amount of opposition that's going to exist there. and all those people that ran against him, if they coalesced with his opponent, it could be a race. And remember, Joe Mystic will tell you, the late great Dick Caligiuri was an independent candidate for mayor who won that seat the first time out. So there is a history of Pittsburghers voting independent.
All right, Governor, your thoughts?
Well, as a former Republican governor and attorney general and U.S. attorney who lives outside the city, I kind of watch all this and I'll make a couple observations. Number one, and Joe, you correct me if I'm wrong, were Ed Gainey to win, he'd be the first African-American mayor of the city of Pittsburgh.
Yes, he would, yes.
At this point in time in our history, diversity is extremely important. Everybody talks about it, particularly in the Democrat Party. And I think that that's putting a strain on Peduto also. If the African-American community would stick with Gainey, Jim, you tell me, that would be a huge blow to any chance Peduto has, even with other people in the race. Number two, those of us who have been in politics always know that if you've got one opponent that you're worried about, you try and get two other people to get in the race also to do exactly what Jim Byrne said, dilute it. And I wonder if that is going on. Number three, yes, our Republican Party is having great difficulties at the moment post the election of 2020. Putting that aside, the Democrat Party is having its issues too, with the issue of the progressives versus what I would call the mainstream. And this is going to be an election that I think is going to be divided or decided by the progressives versus the mainstream.
I have to throw it out to both Joe and Jim for a quick comment on what the governor said, and Keith about an independent.
Yes, I alluded to the possibility of an independent in my remarks. If the tea leaves will be in this primary. If Bill Peduto comes out of this over 55 and you study the film, so to speak, and it looks like that base is a little bit more solid than we think it is as we sit here today, it would be more difficult for an independent. But Keith is right, and there's conversations are being had. And look, if Bill comes out as vulnerable as we think he is, and a well-funded independent steps up that can coalesce the opposition from the primary, the anti-Peduto vote, and Republicans, and have the right message, listening to the city of Pittsburgh and what it needs, there could be a race. We could see a situation like we saw with Dick Caligiuri in 1977. And the funding is critical. You're going to need it because Bill will have it. He will have it. The other important point I want to make about that is that if you start early and often, many of the people that were in Bill, let's say hypothetically Bill comes in at 50 or 51, 52. Many of those people that are in that 52% couldn't be for Mr. Gainey or the other two for whatever reason, and just said, Bill is the lesser of the evils, therefore I shall vote for him. That would explain a chunk of Bill's percentages. They will immediately be off of Bill and with the opposition to strengthen the chances of an incumbent. This is a very viable possibility in November in Pittsburgh. All
right, Joe, your quick thoughts.
Yeah, I think there's a general sense of dissatisfaction across the city. You can pin it on a lot of different things. When you're an incumbent, it's hard to manage a city. These are difficult times to manage a city, but you begin to lose support over time. It could be snow removal. That's never worked well in this city. He's never gotten that right. He talked about algorithms years ago. I always said he just needs a guy named Al who works in the works department and knows what streets to plow.
And has
algorithms. Violence is up. Deadly violence is up in the city. The police are very unhappy. That's never a good sign in an American city. And he seems to have frustrated both the left and the right. In terms of police reform, he's not generated the support he needs on the left. And in terms of quelling violence, he's not generated the support he needs right of center. So it's in a tough spot. It's not easy to run a city, and some of these things come along with the job. Keep in mind that in 2013, he won the Democratic primary with 23,000 votes. Now, since we always reelect our incumbents, that means that his mayorship, his mayoral was secured initially by 23,000 votes in a city of 300,000 people. So you don't go into this thing with a broad base of support. You have to earn it, and you have to accumulate it over time. And some people believe that he's gone over the top of that hill, and now his support is on the decline.
Stacy,
Yes.
30 seconds, if I may.
All right.
If voters always remember the last thing you did before they go into the polls. Almost like you could pay your credit card on time. You're 1 day late. They're calling your. Voters are the same way. If Bill had 3.5 great years, the last month alone is getting him in trouble. But he hasn't had 3.5 good years. And look at what's happened. As the professor said, gun violence up. And now there was a huge gaffe in tax abatement relief. Residents were billed and didn't get the discounts they applied for. Huge mistake. And then he announces he's going to put more bike lanes out after those two troubling things. It shows perception of a disconnect with the reality of what the Pittsburgh residents need, increasing the chances he's going to have a vulnerable looking result.
Well, very interesting conversation. Thank you. Now, let's turn to an election that is 18 months away from right now. The United States Senate seat that will become vacant with Pat Toomey, this is his decision, a Republican, not to run again. Politico is reporting that the current 17th District Congressman, Connor Lamb, a Democrat, and the man that he defeated last fall on the Republican side, Sean Purnell, will both be running. It is early, Governor, but if Purnell decides to run, is it a good idea to take on Lamb again if they both happen to be the nominees, since he already lost to Lamb?
Well, it's a different dynamic because it's a statewide dynamic. And, Lamb would do very well in the collar counties and in the city of Philadelphia. Purnell would do very well in the rest of the state. The difference in the vote in the congressional district wasn't that big a difference, as I recall. So it's a completely different dynamic. But I don't want to jump in and make Purnell the candidate at this point in time. There are other people that are out there exploring what to run for between governor and Senate. And there are some good candidates in that mix. And there are some other congressmen that could decide, particularly if the districts are getting redrawn and they get taken out of their district, that might say, well, I'm going to run for the Senate. And one of them here is Guy Rethenschlauer. I could see him saying, okay, I'll go run for the Senate. So it's too early to talk about any one candidate on the Republican side.
I would agree with you. It is very early about this, but let's turn to Jim Byrne, because you run state Democrat politics before. It is early, but what about a potential race between Lamb and Purnell statewide?
Let's assume that they both get out of primaries next year.
Right.
Okay. It's a race. It is absolutely a race. Let's stay for a second, step back and look at why Connor Lamb is even thinking about doing this. They're going to redraw the maps, and the consensus is starting to develop that the seat that's going to go is going to be coming out of Western Pennsylvania, because the decline seems to be more here, while you have an increase in population in the east. As I see it, the reason Connor Lamb is testing the water is he knows that is a likelihood. And he knows that even his Democratic counterparts aren't going to put up much of a fight if that seems to be the way things are going to go to get through the redistricting conversation. So in my opinion, Connor Lamb is either up or he's out next year. He doesn't have much of a choice but to take a look at Senate. Otherwise, he's going to be put into a district that it's going to be difficult, if not impossible, for him to win. He barely won the last 2 times in these districts. This will be even a higher hill for him to climb. So that's why he's doing it. Look to the general election. It would be all about turnout. Mr. Purnell will do extremely well, very well, up and down the 79 corridor, as most statewide Republicans have been doing. He is very close to President Donald Trump. And whether Democrats like it or not, the reality of the Western Pennsylvania situation is that Republicans love Donald Trump in Western Pennsylvania. And Sean Purnell is right next to him. That will help Sean in the West. You'll need Philadelphia, and you need the 5 collar counties. You'll need Chester, Montgomery, Bucks, Berks, and Lehigh, and Philly to come out big for Connor Lamb. And it's going to be hard for that to happen because he's tried to appease the moderate to the right in the West. That will be used against him by progressives in a primary, and then that will come back to bite him in the fall. So he would really have, it would be a very close race and very interesting race to watch.
Keith, your analysis.
Well, my sense is it's interesting to talk about these two candidates because of the previous matchup.
Right.
In my opinion, I think they're both regional candidates. I don't think either one of them will make it out of their primaries. That's just my opinion. I think Sean Purnell squandered the opportunity to win a pretty evenly divided district. I think he needed to win that congressional seat. He failed to do it. And I'm not sure that Republicans statewide are going to embrace him because of the fact that he came up short. Connor Lamb, I even think among the people that are supporting him, even in the Democratic side, thinks that he has to level off at some point, that the rise, that it might be too soon for a young man like Connor Lamb to ascend to the United States Senate. So I actually think he's going to have some misgivings within his own party. And on the Republican side, I've been looking a lot at Kathy Barnett, and Kathy Barnett is on fire right now, raising millions of dollars online the last few months, being the darling of the Republican Party nationally, getting a lot of attention. I'd say that she's definitely a person to watch. But again, in preparation, you go to Wikipedia and they tell you these people running on both sides. It's unbelievable. I mean, I think there's 21 either announced or considering on the Republican side, 20 on the Democratic side. And I said, usually it's a who's who. This is more like a who's this. Like who's that? Who are these people? Like, I don't even know their names. They're running for the United States Senate. So hold on to your hats. It's going to be a hell of a ride. But as much as it would be interesting with Purnell and Mr. Lamb, I don't think we're going to see that matchup in November of next year.
All right. Well, let's turn to the great philosopher about this. Joe.
Well, one of the reasons this is so premature is that federal election law kicks in once you've indicated you're a candidate. Mm-hmm. And suddenly you're under all sorts of rules in terms of fundraising and soliciting and spending money. And so there's a reluctance to even say that you're the candidate. Now, whether or not Connor Lamb loses this district here is an open question at this point. I think the conventional wisdom is that that's where the district comes from, that we're going to lose. But we do have a Democratic governor, and congressional districts are drawn by statute like any other piece of legislation, and they're subject to veto. So it's probably even too early to decide which of those districts is going to go in terms of congressional reapportionment. So it's early. This is fun. I'm with Keith. It's right now it's hard to say, hard to predict where we'll be when the time comes.
Well,
I can tell you one person.
Go ahead.
I can tell you one person who's not running.
Yeah,
me.
You. I was going to ask that question.
Watch Chrissy Houlihan, Congresswoman Chrissy Houlihan, 6 congressional districts. She has all of Chester County, Reading. She's a veteran of the United States Armed Forces. She's moderate.
Yeah, I saw her. Yeah, an interesting resume.
Yeah, Keith. She's right up on the line. If she goes, she'll go from in the middle of the pack, I think, to the front of the pack very quickly. Highly electable in Western Pennsylvania, where the Democrats have needed to pay more attention since I left the chairmanship in 2015.
Okay, I'm going to ask you.
Can I make another comment, Stacy?
Yeah, go ahead.
They were talking about fundraising and whatnot. I harken back to my years with Senator Santorum, and I remember after our 2 terms in Congress, running for the United States Senate in 1994 for the first time. At the same time that Governor Ridge was the standard bearer for that time Congressman Ridge running for governor. And it was frustrating to me as I traversed the state with both congressmen seeking money. We'd walk out from some big donor in Erie, and the Governor Ridge would walk out with a check for 100,000 and we'd walk out with a check for 5,000. You know, I mean, you just, because you can't, the limits were just so different. So the pathway to raising money that's necessary is so steep. And a fresh conversation I had yesterday with a national political operative who talks to the people in the GOP nationally in Washington. And I had an extended conversation with him yesterday. And I said, what's the number? I said, I remember 15 years ago, Senator Santorum got sent home and we spent $44 million 15 years ago. I said, so I'm thinking the number is somewhere between 40 and 60. He said, Keith, he said, we expect that if the Republican is successful in Pennsylvania between the primary and general, they'll spend $100 billion. So now you have an understanding of how enormous this is going to be. And when it's a who's this list, you know, the question is who's going to break through there. And that's why I focused on Kathy Burnett, because of her particular prowess early on raising money nationally.
Interesting, to put it mildly. Let me ask this question, and this will be our last question because we're almost out of time. Whether it be Purnell or Lamb or Burnett or whoever it happens to be, when do they need to enter the race? When do they need to announce? Now? Is that what you're saying, Keith?
Oh yeah, I'll let my colleagues talk, but I know we have to concentrate. We have a Supreme Court race. We have important races this year, but you cannot start to build an organization to win a seat in the United States Senate, College of Cardinals, this November. You're already late. If you're only getting started now, you're 3, 4, 5 months behind. You have to have a full working organized structure today.
I agree with that. I mean, if I go back to when I was running for governor, running for attorney general, it was 2 years out that I started. It may not have been announced 2 years out, but it was certainly announced 1 year and 3/4 out. You go around, you meet with people, you start laying groundwork, trying to get state committee endorsement and support that way. We're seeing those people out there doing that right now. I would not be surprised to see right after the primary a whole bunch of announcements.
Well, if you think you're going to run, if you have any temptation, any inkling that you're going to run, one of the reasons you want to at least float that possibility is that you don't want voters, your potential supporters, already pledging to someone else.
Right.
That's right.
I mean, once they've done it, people are honest, people are loyal. If they make a commitment, they want to stick to it, and it's unlikely. It's real hard to get them to betray that commitment once they've made it. So you need to get your name out there and at least hold people in place to wait until you make the formal announcement.
All right.
Absolutely.
Final comment from Jim.
They lock themselves in, and then they say to you, why didn't you get in sooner? I would have been for you, but now I'm committed to this candidate or that candidate. And that's a very significant factor. So yes, I think immediately folks like Ms. Houlihan or Mr. Lamb or Mr. Purnell or Guy, they need to move quickly. They're already behind. And notice how we haven't mentioned John Fetterman on the Democratic side, even though he's been out for 4 months. Even though he got out there, he's raised a lot of money. It's not a lock. It is absolutely not a lock.
Yeah, my understanding is he spent a lot of money to raise a lot of money. So,
Yes.
so the net there is different than the gross. Yeah.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us once again here on Around the Table, Politics 2021. We'll do this maybe after the primary in about 2 weeks or so. Thanks.
Sounds great.
Thanks. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Go vote.
Yes, go vote.